My name is Grace Cotter-Regan, and I'm humbled to serve as the president of Boston College High School. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Gregory E. Belger 68 Center for Performing Arts at Boston College High School. Greg gifted this great facility, and we're delighted that you can all enjoy it today. In my role, I'm hired by the trustees, but missioned as the director of the work by the provincial of the USA Jesuit East Province. And here at BC High, we have a president-principal model. And I'm blessed to have a visionary partner in mission in Principal Adam Lewis, who is with us today. So welcome, Adam and team. We also work in partnership with the Jesuit Superior, who is here today, Father James Krogan, SJ, who serves as the Superior of the Jesuit community and Director of the work as well. And many of the Jesuits are here with us today, as well as my senior team. So welcome to BC High. We're honored to host the Lynch Foundation and you, our partners in Catholic education today. I want to acknowledge the members of our leadership team at BC High, and representing our Board of Trustees is Kevin Powers, who is an alum and a parent, and actually a professor at Boston College in the law school and the founder of the cybersecurity program at BC. So I don't know where Kevin is. Hi, Kevin, wherever you are. Whose sister is the president of Rosemary at Cristo Rey, our partner across the street. So we're great partners, and we actually grew up together in Savin Hill across the street. So it just, circle gets smaller. But we're delighted to really think about the importance of leadership, mission, vision, resources, and strategic opportunities as we focus on mission and the operational vitality of our Catholic schools and order-based schools. We want to welcome Katie Everett and thank Katie for her leadership. We want to thank Peter and his family and the Lynch Foundation for the partnership with the Archdiocese and with all of our schools who work in mission. So thank you so much, and we're delighted to host today, and thank you to all those who hosted the regional meetings on behalf of the Lynch Foundation. To give you just a little bit of context about BC High, I think some of you know that I've lived here my whole life. My career was not here, but my dad was here for 50 years as a teacher, coach, athletic director. He has a long legacy, iconic figure here, one of the giants at BC High, and I feel honored to be on the stage here and at his school. I've made every personal decision in the cafeteria, really did. And so it's funny, I had my own career and I'm back at BC High, but honored to be here and serve, love the mission of the school, love the Jesuits, and love Catholic education. Founded in 1863 with Boston College in the South End, BC High was founded to educate immigrant boys, and we continue our mission by celebrating our 160th year of mission next year in 2023. BC High is a Jesuit Catholic school for young men grades 7 to 12. We currently serve 88 communities, enrolling 1,407 students here, from Boston to Brockton, Revere to Bridgewater, Quincy to Newton. We are excited with our strategic plan, Vision 2026, which has 3 areas, teaching and learning. We just introduced a house system. Many of you may have heard of our house system, 12 houses. It's a vertical model, 12 houses with 90 students, and it was really the vision of our principal and our leadership team, and it's really been incredible. It's all about care and learning. It's a vertical model, as I said, centered on care and learning, where every young man is known, seen, and loved. We also are focused on access and affordability. BC High is committed, like you, to making sure that every student of promise has an opportunity for a Catholic education, and that's one of our priorities at BC High. And finally, we have a great network of 16,000 alumni, 16,000 strong, who help us do what we need to do here at BC High, and they're very generous. You can see you might have seen as you came in, we have a lot of happenings with our campus plan, so a lot of enhancements. We have a new wall, a new streetscape, a couple very exciting donor-funded projects happening, the Murphy Family Stadium, the Cadogan Wellness Center, and then we will be moving on the house system and enhancements in one of our buildings going forward. So really grateful. So I share that with all of you because we know that all of our schools are grounded on great people who came before us and who will come after us. And the benefactors that we all share, I want to just take a moment to say thank you to all of them. And I know that each of you feel the same way. So I just thank you. And that is really about the Lynch Foundation, about Peter, people like Bill Mazakowski, people like Pat Cadogan in our world, who just give of themselves tirelessly, humbly, because it's the right thing to do for the kids. So I just want to take a moment to say that. We make all of our decisions here at BC High with mission and Christ at the center, and all based and steeped in our Ignatian pedagogy, much like all of you. And so today we extend our gratitude to the Lynch Foundation. for their data-driven approach to growth mindset, equity access, collaboration, and long-term sustainability for Catholic education. And on behalf of BC High, welcome. We hope that all of you would join us for a reception in Cadogan afterwards, which is right down the hall here, down by, if you are a BC High alum, it's the old breezeway, which was outside. Now it's enclosed. We're very happy about that. But if you get on to Cadogan, it's a great new building, and our staff will direct you there. So now it's my honor to introduce Bishop Peter Uglietto, who is an alumnus of Boston College High School, to share the opening prayer. Bishop Peter?
Thank you, Katie. Thank all of you for joining us today and for your interest, your care, your concern, your support for Catholic education. We come united in our faith and pleased to offer this prayer together. Praise be you, God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In times past, you spoke in fragmentary and varied ways to our ancestors, to the prophets. In this, the final age, you have spoken to us through your Son, Jesus Christ, through whom you created the universe and now recreated it by his victory, saving us from sin and death. He dwelt among us to reveal your great love and care for the human family. He, mercy incarnate, healed the sick, brought sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, and strength to the limbs of the lame. By the power of the Spirit, he is still present among us in word, in sacrament, and in the hearts of those who live his teaching. God of compassion and love, you call each one of us to continue the mission of the Savior of the world, that we may be the incarnation of mercy for this generation. May we be a people who witness to your love and truth by every action of our lives. Our loving God, source of wisdom, bless all of us here assembled in our commitment in support of Catholic education. May we be witnesses to your wisdom. May wisdom, ever radiant, ever bright, lead us forward. May the students in our Catholic institutions bring hope to a world in need of your light and mercy. Bless us all. May we support them by our example, our worship, our prayers. Praise be you this day and all days forever. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Peter. And we welcome Father Brian Hare, Secretary for Health and Social Service, to offer his opening remarks. Father Hare?
Thank you, Grace, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. When Katie Everett called me, she suggested that I take a couple of minutes to take the focus of this afternoon, which is Catholic education, and put it in a little larger framework. Catholic education is very large in itself, but the interesting thing is Catholic education is one piece of an even larger question. The larger question is the social ministry of the Catholic Church. That is to say, how our faith calls us to be not only disciples, but citizens. How our faith calls the church to live in the world and to shape the world according to the vision of the kingdom that our Advent liturgy points out to us. The social ministry of the church is rooted in three places in the scriptures. In the opening chapters of Genesis, we are told that every human person is the reflection of God, that every person we encounter is the presence of God and deserves respect and care. The second place is the prophets. The prophets were the conscience of Israel, and the prophets always said, the quality of your faith is dependent on the character of justice in the land. The social ministry of the church is tested by that mandate. And the third place where our faith calls us to the social ministry is the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, the judgment of the nations, where Jesus tells us who is worthy to enter the kingdom, and tells us that whenever we fed the hungry, clothed the naked, visited the prisoner, we found him in disguise. And such is the test of the kingdom. The social ministry of the church is the product of two things: citizens and disciples embodied in the same community of people, and then the social institutions of the church: healthcare, social service, and education. The significance of what you are doing this afternoon is the significance of education in the social ministry of the church. From the beginning of the church's history, education, faith, and reason were combined. In the history of American Catholicism, faith, reason, social service are combined. And so it is that you gather for what you are doing this afternoon in continuing the constant journey of the church to be faithful to Genesis, the prophets, the New Testament. And as we try to do that, it's important to recognize that people watch us. So one final thought. At the end of World War II, when Europe was in devastation, the Dominicans in Paris invited Albert Camus, the voice of the French resistance, to come as an agnostic and talk to them about how he dealt with suffering in life and evil in life. And Camus came and reflected on that question. And at the end of the reflection, he said this: it may not be possible for us to create a world in which there is no innocent children who suffer, but it is possible to create a world in which there are fewer innocent children who suffer. And if we look to the Christians and don't find help, where else will we go? That is why what you do today is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Hare, for inspiring us always. And now I'd like to invite the team from EY Parthenon to give their presentation. Allie Huberly and her team, pop up. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Father. Thank you to BC High for hosting this event this evening. We are very excited to share with you today sort of the culmination of the work that we have been doing in partnership with the Lynch Foundation and with many of you over the past 4 months. Just to start with some quick introductions, my name is Phil Vaccaro. I'm a partner with EY Parthenon. I'm joined by my colleagues, Allie and, I always do this. I'm sorry. Allie and Ariel, and then Ines as well. I have a fear of forgetting people's names on stage. I can present a deck, but I can't remember names. So we are here today to talk about the work that we've been doing in this sort of consulting capacity. And one of the things that we have been working with many of you on is trying to collect as much data as possible about how the schools in the Catholic sector are doing in the greater Boston area. Why are we qualified to do this? So we have a dedicated education practice that we've had for over 20 years. Myself and Ariel are former teachers in the New York City school system. I am a former district administrator in the New York City school system under the Mayor Bloomberg administration. And all of our folks are dedicated, all the folks here on this team are dedicated to the education practice, specifically K-12 education in the U.S., whether it's in the public sector, private sector, parochial schools, and so forth. And so, this is work that we've done with a number of networks of schools and organizations and school districts over the past, well, I think Allie and I have been doing it for much of the past decade, and some of our folks over the last few years as well. Most recently, we had worked in the Philadelphia system with a group of Catholic high schools in the greater Philadelphia area, which was helpful as we prepared for, certainly for this work in Boston. So, we do have a slide deck. The bishop gave you a little bit of a preview of some of the initial slides. We do want to start with what our objectives were here today, and with this project overall. So, we wanted to make sure we started with a shared understanding of the facts. How are the Catholic schools in the greater Boston area performing? So we're going to talk about some of the enrollment trends. We're going to talk about some of the academic performance trends. We're going to talk about some of the financial trends. I want to acknowledge that this was a massive undertaking, and we worked closely with a lot of you all and your colleagues to extract data, to gather the data to make sure that we were analyzing in an appropriate way, cleaning the data, and so forth. And so, a lot of work has gone into this, and I think that hopefully that effort will be reflected in sort of the richness of the insights that we will share, today, and that we will continue to share in subsequent forums after today. The second piece is really trying to support regional collaboration among the schools. We understand that there are probably many informal networks that exist within this group, and this notion that we have this community of Catholic schools in the greater Boston area. I'm sure that all of you believe that as a network we are stronger as a group of 89, 90 schools that can come together and support each other. Clearly you have your own individual priorities and missions that you are striving to achieve, but that really through some of the convenings that we've had with the schools thus far, it's clear that folks had a lot to learn from each other, and that in the spirit of collaboration, that can really be beneficial to the sector. And then finally, making sure that we're taking the data, that we're taking the conversations that we've had with each of you, the feedback that we've solicited, the dialogue that we've had, and identify what are some of the challenges and opportunities that the sector faces. We always want to make this grounded in as much data and research as possible, and so you are going to see a lot of slides that have charts on them. That's sort of the language that we speak, but we also are going to try to translate that as much as possible into clear takeaways that you may find useful with your schools. So we've done this work over the last 4 months. We also, for the schools, we do have all of the backup data that we've collected that we're going to share with you individually. We've done some surveys. We're going to share all of that. So each school is also going to get their individual data in addition to sharing the results in aggregate today. If we go to the next slide. So one of the fantastic parts of this effort has been the amount of engagement with many of you, with all of you. The participation from schools, 96% of the schools participating. We've had a number of convenings with over 75 stakeholders participating in group sessions. We had over 4,000 responses to the survey that we sent out to parents of children who are currently in Catholic schools. We had 280 parishes provide data. So we were really trying to be as thorough as possible in our approach. And I think that hopefully will be reflected in the information that we're able to share today. So we're going to start by sharing some system-level insights. So what is the data telling us across, in particular, enrollment, academic performance, and some of the financial analysis that we've done? We're going to invite some of your colleagues to come up on stage and share some of the success stories and some of the work that they've been doing to really drive enrollment gains and ensure their financial health. We're going to talk a little bit about recommendations and next steps that could come out of this work. And then we'll also have a little bit of time for some question and answer. We do want to make sure, and I'm sure that Katie and the Lynch Foundation want to make sure that the conversation doesn't stop here, that this is a step in a longer process to encourage collaboration, to encourage data-driven decision-making, to think about how schools are differentiating themselves in their markets, and to make sure that there is a sustainable future for Catholic schools in the greater Boston area. So those are our objectives for today. I'm going to quickly touch on some of the highlights of the findings, and then I'm going to turn things over to Ariel to get us started with the enrollment topic. So first, if we're just starting at an overall system level, and we were looking at the data going back to school year 18, so school year 18 and all the way up to the current data in school year 23, there's about 3,700 fewer students in Catholic schools in the greater Boston area over the past 5 years. About 2/3 of those were lost as a result of 14 school closures that happened between school year 18 and school year 21. There have been no additional closures since school year 21. COVID presented a real opportunity for Catholic schools. There are a lot of families that were disenfranchised with the public system in having to go through the remote learning experience, and many schools, charter schools, Catholic schools, private schools, who were able to continue with an in-person delivery model during this time really benefited. And in hindsight, it seems like if what we know now, it would have been great if more schools had made that decision. But it was certainly an opportunity that Catholic schools sort of seized, and families were sort of seeking this in-person option, and it did help the Catholic schools stabilize enrollment as a system over the last 3 years, which is great. We've also noticed that as we looked at some of the individual school level, because there are clearly some schools that did increase enrollment, some that have not increased enrollment. But among the schools that have increased enrollment, a lot of it is due to making the schools more accessible to new groups of students, whether that is increasing pre-K enrollment, whether that is adding grades, whether that is going co-ed. So making schools more accessible through this period has really benefited schools in the system. From a student outcome standpoint, I think the one real sort of takeaway here is what distinguishes Catholic schools from, in particular, district schools in their local markets is that you all are really preparing students for college. That is sort of the expectation that families have when they send their children to your schools, and that students who attend Catholic schools do go on to attend college at a much, much higher rate than other schools. And so, even though we didn't notice huge differences between Catholic schools and maybe some of their peer schools in terms of SAT scores or in terms of test scores, you certainly see a significant difference in terms of college matriculation. And I'm sure that reflects the capabilities that you all have built within your schools to prepare students for the college application process. On the financial side, this data was the hardest for us to sort of wrap our heads around. what we were ultimately looking for were indicators of the financial health of schools. And we were able to develop various proxies for those indicators. But I think that any single metric is hard to sort of extrapolate too much from. But we did notice that that the coverage ratio, when we look at revenue as a percentage of, or tuition as a percentage of operating costs, there are some schools that effectively are only generating 10% of their total costs through tuition, while others are fully funding their costs through tuition. So there's a pretty significant range. If you are lower in terms of your coverage ratio, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't necessarily mean that you're at risk of some sort of significant economic challenge. It just means that you are finding other ways to meet your operating expenses, most likely through various fundraising efforts. But we will dig into that a little bit deeper. And if you are a school that covers less of your cost base through tuition, and we see that ratio is declining over time, that would certainly be something that we would be interested in watching. We also noticed that fundraising is disproportionately concentrated in a handful of schools in the Catholic schools in the greater Boston area. I think it's 10% of schools cover roughly 50% or raise roughly 50% of the funds in the system. So we're going to invite a little bit later some of the folks from the schools to talk about how they are managing through these various challenges, how they are driving successful outcomes across these various areas, and so I think it's going to be really helpful to sort of take the data and translate it into actual experiences and how schools are collecting data to improve the value proposition and the services and sort of their delivery model to families. So that is, at a high level, the points that we wanted to communicate here. There's a lot of underlying data that supports this work, and I think Ariel's going to get us started with on enrollment.
Great. So we'll start with an overview of the system, just to understand where the schools that we're talking about, who are the children that they're serving. So at a system level, this is the data that Phil spoke about. What we see on this graph is the enrollment in aggregate of all of the Catholic schools in the system. And what you can see at the bottom is that the number of schools has actually changed over time. So this is all of the students who are enrolled across all of the schools in each of the years that are represented. And so big themes here that we can see, from school year 18 to school year 20, which we were thinking of as the sort of pre-COVID period, there's a decline of about 3,500 kids. But then from school year 20 to school year 23, where we are now, the enrollment has stabilized at about 32,000 kids. And so despite the fact that between school year 20 and 21, you had 9 additional school closings, the schools were able to maintain enrollment at about 32,000 kids. One other point to call out here is there is a dip between 20 and 21, and then it sort of rebounds in 22. So part of that was the school closings, and then part of that was also because of some restrictions that were placed on pre-K enrollment because of COVID, and then those were largely recouped, as you can see in the following year. So the remainder of the analyses today will focus on the 89 schools that are operating now today in school year 23. And those schools collectively serve roughly 32,000 students. And so we have a map on the page which shows the distribution around the greater Boston area. And so today when we refer to the Boston area and Boston area schools, we don't mean just Boston in the central region or the BPS district. We're referring to this entire region of the Boston school area. And you can see there are schools, the sort of size of the dots are based on the enrollment of schools. So you have some schools that are relatively smaller. The pre-K 8 schools tend to have lower enrollment. And then some of the 612 and 912 schools are larger. And then another way to think about who are the schools, other ways to segment them. So the schools can be segmented based on their geographic location, their region. So the schools are across 6 different regions. There's a split between urban and suburban. It's roughly 60% that are suburban, and that's just based on the population density of the area. The grade level served, so majority are pre-K 8 schools, but handful of 612, 712s, and then 912s as well. And lastly, there's a number of different governance structures that are represented. Great. So on this slide, what we see is the students. So who are the students that the Catholic schools are serving, and how does that compare to the district public schools and the charter schools in the Boston area? And so on the left-hand side, you have the percent of students who are students identify as students of color in the system. And so what we can see is that the Catholic schools are serving a relatively lower portion of students of color when compared to the district and the charter schools, but the urban schools are serving a relatively larger portion of students of color. And on the right-hand side, it's a similar theme for the percent of students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. So again, Catholic schools are serving a lower portion of students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch, but it is a little bit higher in the urban areas. Great. Moving on to enrollment. So one of the things that Phil mentioned was that we provided a survey to schools, which was optional for them to distribute to families to collect some information about their decision making as they're choosing schools, as well as satisfaction. And so one of the first things that we were interested in learning was, why do families choose Catholic schools for their students? Why do they choose to enroll? And so what we learned, and what we can see on this slide, the question was, how important to you were each of the following criteria when selecting a school for your child? And they could literally rank the choices from 1 to 5, or up to 5. And so on the left-hand side, the most popular choice was for the school's ability to meet my child's needs. And so over and over again, and this was a theme that was echoed when we had the regional convenings as well, and I think it was an idea that was shared by school leaders, principals, that parents are choosing the schools because they know that their child's going to get individualized attention, whether that be remedial, extension, or just to be known at the school. And that really came through in the survey. The other 2 top reasons were academic rigor and the family and student community. Academic rigor was more important for families of high school students, whereas the family and student community was actually more important for families of pre-K to 8. So across all of the populations, the ability to meet child's needs came out on top, but then there was some variation in what was the next most important. So that was why the families are choosing the schools. We also wanted to understand, when do they start thinking about their choice to enroll students, and who's influencing their decision. And so this should give a little bit of a flavor of some of the survey data that schools will receive back for their school, and also be able to compare it to how that looked across all of the schools as a comparison set. So on the left-hand side, the question that was asked was, when did your family start considering a school for your child? And what you can see is that over 60, about 65%, are looking a year or more ahead of time. And about over 30% are actually looking 2 or more years ahead of time. So when you're thinking about when you have to start building relationships with families, the timeline is significantly before the child is going to enroll. In terms of influential stakeholders, the question is, who was the most influential in your decision to enroll? And so we see at the bottom, essentially, a lot of these categories are related to word of mouth, right? So families are learning about it from somebody in the community, or from a friend, or from a family member. And so while about 30% are friends and family, that middle block of current school student or parents and current school teacher administrators, the parents are answering for their current school. So what that tells you is that the people who are in your own school community are really influential in prospective parents' decision to enroll. One last piece that we thought was interesting, we asked if the parent who was filling out the survey, if either they or their partner also attended Catholic school, and 60% of the parents, so the families who answered this survey, had either one or both parent attend a Catholic school. So at a system level, it's interesting to think about if there is a way to better track and reach out to alumni of Catholic schools. So what this slide shows us, moving into the actual enrollment now, so how did the schools perform over the last 5 years? And again, this is the 89 schools that have remained open from the school year 18 to 23. There are 89 schools, and this is showing us how the schools perform both pre and post-COVID, so pre and post-school year 20. So in the upper left-hand side, in the white quarter there, you have schools that increased pre-COVID, but decreased since COVID. So that's a very rare case, only 3 schools. But in the bottom left-hand side, we have schools that have decreased pre-COVID or were decreasing pre-COVID and continued to decrease since COVID. So those are the 30 schools where we might be concerned. Now, some of those likely only decreased a couple students. They were largely stable and utilizing their space well, but others may have decreased more. But I think overall what this slide shows us, there are a lot more schools on the right-hand side, which is green. So we have 37 schools that were decreasing pre-COVID and have increased since school year 20. So we can say that those schools sort of had a comeback or a COVID bounce. And the schools that are in the top right, those 18 schools were increasing the entire time, so had strong performance. But overall, what we can see from this slide is that there does appear to be a positive effect from COVID, and that those 55 schools that are increasing their enrollment have some momentum that they can continue to build upon. So then we wanted to understand, that was at an aggregate level for schools, and we wanted to understand better, how does this look by grade? And so what these graphs are showing us is how had the enrollment changed over the 5-year period by grade level. So on the left-hand side, the graph is showing enrollment by grade for pre-K to 8 schools. And on the right-hand side, we have enrollment by grade for 6 to 12 and 9 to 12 schools. And so big highlights here, the tallest bar that clearly stands out is pre-K. And we recognize we are grouping in different age groups of pre-K together here, which is why the height of the bar is significant. But the change or the growth in 13% is also one of the largest. So pre-K in aggregate comprises the largest share of enrollment and has also seen significant growth in the past years. Other big things or themes on this page to call out, you can see that in the left-hand side, so the pre-K to 8 schools, grades 6, 7, and 8 have some of the largest declines, whereas sort of the exact opposite is true on the right-hand side. So the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades are actually growing a significant amount in the 6 to 12 or the 7 to 12 schools. So that showed us the growth or change over time for the schools by grade. What this slide shows is the net retention from school year 22, so from last year, to this year. So we wanted to understand, like, if we think about that last year transition as sort of the return to normalcy, or as normal as it could be now, post-COVID, how could those trends potentially be indicators for the future? And so what we see here when it says, for example, where you see the kindergarten bar that says 92%, what that means is that 92% of the students who are enrolled in K1, so the 4-year-olds in pre-K, returned for kindergarten. Now, we don't know that those are the exact same 92%, but it represents 92% of the students, of the total students who are enrolled in pre-K. And so big highlights that we can see from this slide. Overall, all of the retention rates are above 90%, which is very strong. Some of the strongest areas we can see are in some of the middle grades, so 6th, 7th, and 8th, which is a good indicator for the future enrollment. The high school grades also have higher retention than historically, so that's a good indicator for the future. And there are some opportunities potentially to increase enrollment in the lower grades in the future. So once we understood what happened, what was the growth, or how the schools performed, we then wanted to ask ourselves why. So why did certain schools perform well? Were there any similarities between those schools, similarities in their geographic location, for example, or the demographics of the areas around them? And so we tried to really pull through a lot of these different indicators to understand if there would be any similarities or correlations. And what we found were that there really weren't. But what we did find was that the schools that were able to maintain stable enrollment or grow over the 5-year period largely did so by increasing access to the schools. And so the ways in which they did that, there were a few ways, but the 3 largest ones are represented here. So one of them was expanding pre-K. So as we saw, pre-K grew a lot over this period. So that was both expanding age levels served, as well as expanding the number of seats for pre-K. Another one was adding co-divisional education, so switching from single gender to both gender education. And the last one was expanding the size of the facility. So literally expanding space so that you're able to serve more kids. And that doesn't necessarily mean making it a nicer facility. It just literally meant that they got more space and were able to serve more kids. So when we look across all the schools who grew enrollment or remained stable, 70% of them implemented at least one of those strategies over the period. So what we have on this slide, what we wanted to understand was, are there enough students in the system at a particular feeder grade level to match or meet the enrollment of the subsequent grade? And so what we mean here by feeder is, for example, the left-hand side bar is pre-kindergarten, so the 4-year-olds. We wanted to understand, are there enough 4-year-olds in the system, if they were all retained, to fill the kindergarten seats? And so the gray is the feeder, the enrollment of the feeder grade, and the green line that goes across is the enrollment of the sort of subsequent receiving grade. So in this case, it's kindergarten. And so what we can see here is that for pre-K at the system level, there are enough pre-K or K1 students to fill the enrollment of the kindergarten seats. But the same is not true for the transition from 5th grade to 6th grade or from 8th grade to 9th grade. And so all that means is that the schools who are serving those grades are looking outside of the feeder system, outside of the Catholic schools, and getting students from other places, so presumably the district schools. So that's the picture at the system level. What the right-hand side shows is how that differs regionally. So the need to recruit students outside the system differs pretty significantly, the patterns by region. So just to go through one as an example, in the central region, for example, the first 2 squares are green, so they have enough students in pre-K to fill K seats and 5th grade to fill 6th grade seats, but there are not enough students in the 8th grade to fill 9th grade seats. So this is really something that within the region, schools need to think about differently. This is another slide that came from the survey results. And so here we wanted to understand, for the families that are enrolled in the schools, how satisfied are they? How likely are they to continue to send their children to Catholic school? And so what you can see on the left-hand side is that the vast majority of families are very satisfied with the schools where their children are enrolled, and they are also very likely to continue enrolling their students in Catholic school. We then asked for those who said they were not likely to continue enrolling in Catholic school, what was their reason for that, and where might they intend to send their child instead. And what we found, and again, this is a very small number, it was only 429 who indicated either a 1, 2, 3, or 4 for their likelihood to continue sending their child to a Catholic school. That the largest reason for that was costs. And so even though it looks like a large part of the bar there, it actually only represents 4% of the entire family population who answered. Great. So with that, we're going to move on to one of the schools that we are highlighting. So I'd like to welcome up to the stage, we have Allie Dutson, who is the president of Our Lady of Perpetual Help Mission Grammar, and Caroline Sliney, who is the principal.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Allie Dutz, and I'm really proud to be here today with you to share a little bit about our story and our enrollment growth over time. And just a bit about Mission Grammar. We are 315 scholars strong. We've had an increase of 110 scholars since 2018, which is amazing. We serve infants, yes, you heard me correctly, infants, 3-month-olds, all the way through grade 6. And we serve scholars from 72 different zip codes, which is an impressive draw. We also have 75% of our scholars qualifying for free or reduced lunch. And we also have 92% of our scholars are scholars of color. Again, located right in Mission Hill, so we have a fantastic neighborhood around us. So our real enrollment innovation began with this idea of how do we respond to the call and the demand for high quality early childhood seats. And that was really brought to us by the Lynch Foundation and the vision and the wisdom to really think about how Catholic education can provide something of significant value in this space. So really thinking about that, in 2007, we opened our first early childhood classroom, which was K-1 scholars, 4-year-olds. Now they are some of our oldest scholars in the early childhood campus. We continued to innovate around early childhood education, and in 2017, we opened our first ever infant and toddler program. So serving those scholars as young as 3 months old. We had this opportunity to really think about how are we richly and deeply partnering with families at such a young age. We knew that this was not only helping us to live our mission most fully, really being in partnership with families so deeply, but also we're responding to this call for high quality early education. We know that 85% of scholars, or 85% of brain development happens before scholars turn 2.5 years old. So when we can get to families early and deeply, that is really where we can do this amazing work and partner. In 2020, we embarked on a new partnership with Boston Public Schools. We are a universal pre-K school. So that means that we're actually the first Catholic school to have a contract of this kind with Boston. We have a few others that are joining us this year. But really, that's an opportunity for us to serve and deliver that education in our K-1 seats and K-0 seats. We have 55 seats that are universal pre-K seats from the city of Boston, which has been an incredible partnership, again, aimed at increasing quality and opportunity. And because of all of these partnerships, we've really continued to develop our financial model and have these robust opportunities for scholar continued growth and success. Also, we have a fantastic opportunity to say that our scholars are living the gospel on the road to college starting at 3 months. And we know that is true because we have this opportunity to partner with Cathedral High School in the South End, grades 7 through 12. And we really promise our families that we're going to be working side by side from birth to college. This partnership is an incredible cornerstone of our work, but also we really want to think about how do we continue to support not only the enrollment growth over time, but that staffing model, and Caroline's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So as Allie said, having the opportunity to add these 4 grades really allowed for us to think about what a scholar's journey is in the 12 years that they are with us. And so that necessitates that our staffing model is responsive and that we're recruiting really strong teachers who have a deep understanding of the specific age groups that they're serving. And so what we looked at with our staffing model is really finding out how do we recruit great teachers, but then how do we invest in them and continue to develop their capacity once they're on board. And so what we did in really kind of focusing in on finding these kind of high quality and innovative teachers, we also wanted to prioritize teachers of color. And so we have 49% of our staff are teachers of color, and 80% of our early childhood staff are people of color. And so those folks really add a robust representation for our scholars and support our informing how we move forward. So a lot of what we've done in the recruitment efforts is working with our board to ensure that our salaries are competitive and able to kind of reach out and be competitive with folks that we are looking to bring onto our team. But once they get onto our team, we want to ensure that they're being taken care of and they're being supported in their practice. So we have a really robust approach to building the capacity of teachers through robust professional development, both internally in a really kind of dynamic and collaborative teacher community, but also in reaching out to partners and experts in the field to support really the differentiation for each of the grade levels that we serve. And so we've kind of worked through that and reached out to ensure that that's kind of an ongoing part of our teacher culture, but also partnered with the Lynch Foundation and Emmanuel and Boston College and some other of our partners to make sure that our teachers have paths to licensures and paths to degrees. So really ensuring that our folks who are coming on board know that they'll have a continued opportunity to hone their craft and better meet the needs of all of our students. So those are some of the ways that we've kind of tried to make sure that as we move forward, we are ensuring that our early childhood and older grades are strong as well.
This is really hard to do in 5 minutes. Okay.
I was gonna say.
0 minutes left. I got it. I just wanted to highlight this graph because this really showcases there is enrollment growth across all grades. And that is something we're incredibly proud of, but it is not just enrollment growth. These are not just numbers. This is growth in quality because we're investing in our youngest learners. And we know that when we invest in the earliest grades, the earliest ages with our partners and our families, that we are really making a change for our school, the lifelong vitality of our school and the trajectory of these scholars. I hope that you can ask questions later. Thank you so much for hearing a little bit about our school.
Thank you. The next case study or school that we're going to highlight to bring up, we have Ed Hardiman, who is the head of school at St. John's Prep, but is speaking on behalf of the Zavarian Network.
Thanks, Ray. Good afternoon. That's a hard presentation to follow. I'll yield some of my time, but thank you for the opportunity. As a network of schools, there are 13 Zavarian Brothers sponsored schools in the United States, from Kentucky all the way down south, all the way to ourselves, St. John's Prep up in Danvers. There's 4 schools here in the Archdiocese of Boston, and those 4 schools have each experienced enrollment growth. And one of the challenges that we continue to work on is we know that families want to come to a school where there's a strong positive culture, where there's a culture that's aligned with mission, and where there's a mission that's aligned with the family's values. And what a lot of we've done as a network is a tremendous amount of collaboration between our schools through Patrick Slattery, who's the executive director of sponsorship for our network. We have programs where our heads of school get together twice a year. We have an annual retreat where students get together, 6 to 10 students from each of our schools get together to reflect, to learn, and to pray on what it means to be a part of a Zavarian Brothers sponsored school. And those students are then required to come back to their schools and find ways to animate the mission in our school as well. Another example is we do an annual program at the beginning of each academic year where we take all of the teachers that are coming in new to our network from across the network, all 13 schools. They travel to Baltimore, Maryland for a weekend-long orientation, and they come to understand from a macro level what it means to be part of the Zavarian network. And then usually what happens is that network-wide orientation is followed up by a school-based orientation where we talk how each of our individual schools lives the values and lives the mission of Zavarian Brothers sponsored school. What we found from an enrollment standpoint is having a great degree of clarity on what our values are, having a great degree of clarity on how we live those values really helps us to have a distinct value proposition to those families and really helps us clearly state to our potential families how we live, what it means to be a Zavarian Brothers sponsored school in the Archdiocese of Boston, and what it means to be an inclusive Catholic school in the Archdiocese of Boston. Our schools are really characterized by strong interpersonal relationships, by a commitment to ensuring that we embrace everyone as created as the image and likeness of God, and by a commitment to ensure that we empower everyone who crosses into our school to be a unique expression of God's love in the world. And what the network has done informally is it's also given us a great panel of experts. As a head of school, I can call my colleagues at Malden Catholic, at Zavarian, at St. X in Kentucky, share different problems or challenges that I have, learn from their experience, and then take what I've learned from them and put it into practice at my school. And we've been able to do that a number of times, formally and informally, as we support each other, encourage each other, and share the common set of values that we have that animate our school. Overall, this is all exacerbated by the reality that in 2005, there were just about 100 Zavarian Brothers in the United States, so a small congregation. Today, there are 64. And about close to more than 50% of those brothers in the United States today are retired. So it's really incumbent upon us as lay people to reflect on that mission, to live that mission, and to connect with our network moving forward. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much to our presenters. We're going to hear from a couple of other schools today, but hopefully you're starting to see, some of the data come to life through the schools presenting. So my name is, as Phil mentioned, is Allie Huberly. I'm a partner at EY Parthenon as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the data around student outcomes and financials. Before I get there, though, I realize we threw a lot of data at you in the enrollment section. And I do think it ultimately boils down to a couple points if you had to summarize it simply. It is the case that the system is serving fewer students than it did in 2018. And it is also the case that there are some schools that are seeing continued erosion in their enrollment. That said, I hope that you took away the message that there is tremendous amount to build on through what we presented, because COVID has clearly presented many of the schools with an opportunity that has really been harnessed. And that COVID bump is real, but it has also continued into school year 23. And so it's not as if we saw a bunch of kids just come for in-person school and then leave. Many of these families are finding that this environment is truly a better environment for their child. You see that reflected in the survey data and the families that want to stay and the retention that has occurred over time. So hopefully what you take from that is, the tremendous base upon which I think there is success to build going into the future. But also, hopefully you see some of the challenges that you will want to grapple with over time, just thinking around, the regions that do not have enough students in the feeder schools to fill seats and who will have to go outside of the traditional system and think about how they market to those families and how they bring those families into the system. So just a quick little summary of what was a lot of data, but hopefully a lot of interesting data. So as we get to student outcomes, I think this section is a little bit simpler because there's really just two core headlines here. And one of which is, when you look at the outcomes of our high schools, one thing stands out very clearly, which is that relative to the peer schools, our district and charter schools, and certainly the overall Massachusetts state average, students from our high schools go on to college at a much higher rate. So nearly every student that steps through the doors of our high schools ultimately goes on to college. And that is the case even despite the fact that if you look on the other side of the page, the SAT scores at the Catholic schools are not substantially higher than at peer schools. They are higher, but they are not substantially higher. But clearly there is something about the college-going culture, the support that is provided to students, the guidance counselors, so on and so forth, that really do ensure that students are going on to college. And you can think of the same message being mirrored at the lower school level of thinking about a competitive high school or a high school that will suit your needs in order to get to college. And in addition to seeing this in the data, I think we heard this from the schools that value proposition is really resonating with families, and again creates an opportunity for the schools in our system to really be known for that. When we look at the lower school grade levels, so this is data from basically the K-8 schools, we see a story that is pretty similar to what we saw in the SAT scores on the prior page. So what we are comparing here is what's called the MAP test at the Catholic schools. So that is basically a standardized test that students take to evaluate their proficiency in math and ELA. And we're comparing it to the MCAS scores of the Boston Public Schools. There's basically a map that you can crosswalk between the two of them. And I apologize, it's not just BPS schools, it's the Boston area schools. So it is essentially all of the schools that kind of compete with our Catholic schools. And so what you see here is that, we're in the dark blue, the Catholic schools. Generally speaking, particularly in the urban areas, we are outperforming the district schools. It's a little bit closer in the suburban areas, and in ELA, actually the schools are being outperformed. But in general, it is a picture of some slight outperformance. But again, I think that what families are really thinking about when they think about the schools is not necessarily looking at the exact difference in the test scores or the exact percentage point difference, but again, really that ability to serve the individual child and their academic needs and get them, where they need to go to have a successful adult life. The other headline I'll say is that despite all the data that you have seen around the outcomes, there's also a very wide range of outcomes across the schools. So when it comes to the K-8 schools, we are seeing everything from 10% of students being proficient in math and reading to 80% of students being proficient with a median of about 36%. And there's about half of the schools, a little more, that outperform their surrounding peers, so their surrounding district and charter schools. So, it really is a bit of a mixed picture. And so that does create an opportunity for some additional academic support for schools to figure out, what can we do to push that number higher than 57% in terms of schools that are really outperforming their peers, to really solidify, the reasons why our schools are, can compete against those district schools. And the same is really true on the SAT. Obviously that is not exactly the best proxy in the world, but again, it's a wide range of average SAT scores, and similarly, about half of the schools that are outperforming their surrounding peers. So I'm going to turn it over to another school case study. So we're going to welcome Mary Federucci as the school leader of Mount Alvernia, as well as Maureen McCafferty, who is the vice principal.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Lynch Foundation and for BC High for hosting. I'm going to let Maureen McCafferty kick off first.
Good evening. And our problem was trying to help children reach mastery so that we are moving them forward in the most positive way. At Mount Alvernia, we do screen our students, but we don't screen our students to exclude them. Rather, what we do is look to see what we can do to meet the gaps that they might come to us with. And those that have come through our preschool and kindergarten, they too sometimes have gaps. We have students with 504s, IEPs. We look to make each child successful. And to do that, we use the NWEA MAP scores, but we also use IXL. And each year, the principal has evaluated those scores to see the areas in which we are not as strong as we'd like to be. So one of the first times when we did the MAP testing, informational reading was the one that was lower in the ELA department. So we met as a faculty, and this was faculty and staff, because it's a school issue. It's not just the reading teacher, it's not just the science teacher. If we are going to help the students, we have to make a concerted effort. So it was, where in everyday life is informational text so that it could be addressed when you're choosing your lunch menu, when you're reading directions for a worksheet. So it went beyond just those that were teaching science, social studies, nonfiction literature. From that point, we then look each year. As I said, the principal will go through whatever scores are coming out, and we feel like, gee, we're not as strong in math as we'd like to be. So we listen to our teachers. 3 different teachers, 3 different grade levels, went to 3 different workshops presented by the same professor at Framingham State University. So a dynamic individual, it was the principal at that point said, well, there's a spark here. I need to capitalize on it. And again, it was whole school. So we did professional development for everyone, and it was unfortunately in the 2020-2021 year. So the first 2 pieces of it were done over Zoom, but we had buy-in from everybody. And again, it was, what could we do to, as one strategy school-wide? This man's focus is Cuisenaire rods, and he views Cuisenaire rods as the phonics of math, and that if you can teach the children from the pre-K level, then you will be able to teach all concepts and make it far more concrete for some children. So we had the 2 professional developments done. They were probably about 5 hours in total. And then we had him come in the 2021 year, when we were able to be open a little bit more. He came and presented lessons at each grade level. And in those lessons, he taught whatever was being taught by the math teacher, and showed each of us how these rods could impact student development. Not to be used on a well, they are used on a long-term basis, but on an exclusive basis. They're 15, 20 minutes, maybe once or twice a week, and that just promotes the learning and the growth. And it has been effective for us. And after his presentation in the classrooms, he and the teachers then spent time debriefing as to what he did, questions they had, and we've done it now for into our third year, knowing that the kindergarten now has probably the strongest of backgrounds, and building up, the children have a better use of it. So it has been effective.
One thing we added this year was to evaluate the NWA MAP scores 3 times a year. So after every test, we have 2 of each grade. The 2 teachers sit with our learning specialist, evaluate test scores and the impact that it may have on curriculum moving forward. The biggest thing with all of this is the school's investment in hiring personnel to assist students. So they're broken up into 3 groups. Again, 2 of each grade, but they're 3 reading and math groups, and leveled based on their abilities. That makes a difference because we're able to bring children along at the level that they feel comfortable at. And it is possible at our school for a child to be in a higher reading group and a lower math group. And that is because of extra personnel, careful budget, which is becoming an issue, and the dedication of our learning specialist who goes into classrooms and also assists with that other grouping as necessary. However, she's needed, and she's also a great resource for the faculty. So having that dedicated person has been so important.
And then using this data from NWEA as well as the diagnostics, we've targeted certain things, and that has helped our RIT scores go up for the children in the 3-time-a-year standardized testing, the goal for all of us. And then as a school, we are not one who excludes any child, but through our work and the dedication of our teachers, we've been named twice as a National Blue Ribbon School. So this is students who are performing at the 85th percentile or better. We have some that are at the 99th, and we have some that are at the 30th, so the average helps. But we work hard to target those certain areas, and when we do, we have seen success. So, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So we are going to move on to talk about the financial data. And I think as Phil mentioned, this really was kind of the trickiest data for us to unravel and to make comparable across schools. And ultimately, I think what we concluded is there's no one way to sort of pinpoint a school that is in potential financial distress or headed to potential financial distress. But there are some things that are worth keeping an eye on and are worth sort of understanding a little bit better. So we'll talk through some of that. So if we go to the next slide, the first thing that we looked at was the extent to which schools are covering their operating costs with net tuition. And so what you see here is each bar represents a school, and the coloring in the bar represents whether that's a suburban or an urban school. And the height of the colored part of the bar represents basically the net tuition coverage. So the schools at that end of the page are, basically they cover 100% of their operating expenses with net tuition. And then on this end of the page, basically this school down here, it's 10% of operating expenses are covered by net tuition. Now, there is not anything wrong with any of these models across the page, right? It's perfectly fine to operate, where you cover all of your expenses with net tuition. It is also fine to operate where you do not do that, provided that the school is able to sort of continuously make up the gap through fundraising or other means. And, there's a wide variety of strategies that schools are using. And so this page is not meant to imply that, these schools down here are necessarily in danger, but we wanted to sort of set the stage for understanding, what the exact situation of the schools is. And we also wanted to look to see how that has changed over time. So we'll get to that on the next page. So what you see here is for the schools on the right-hand side of the page that have over 80% of coverage of their operating expenses with net tuition, by and large, over the past couple of years, they've actually increased that tuition. That does not mean that they have necessarily increased what they're charging families. What I mean is that over time, more and more of their expenses have been covered by net tuition. Now, that may mean that they're increasing tuition. That's certainly one way to accomplish that. It could also mean that you're bringing down your operating costs, or there's a wide variety of different strategies. And so, we would generally think of those schools in the green as saying, all right, well, they are sort of continuing to execute whatever strategy they're executing, and in general, they are able to cover a wide variety or most of their costs, and that's sort of only continuing over time. For the schools that have less than 80% of coverage, now again, there's nothing inherently bad about that, but we did note one, potentially concerning thing in the data, which is that about 50% of those schools are seeing sort of continued deterioration in terms of the percent of their operating costs that are covered by net tuition. And in particular, there is a group of schools with net tuition coverage below 50%, where they have seen sort of continued decline of over 5% over that 3-year period. And so again, that does not necessarily imply that those schools are in financial distress. What it does mean, though, is that the burden on those schools to fundraise has increased over time. They have to fundraise more and more and more over time because that coverage ratio is going down over time. And so the question really just becomes, is that sustainable? Is that something that the schools can continue to do? And so again, not necessarily an exact signal of financial distress for any one given school, but rather something to keep an eye on as we understand if that is sustainable over time. And as we think about fundraising, there's another important item to understand about sort of the system as a whole and how fundraising currently works. So what you see on this page is each school is, again, a bar. And the height of the bar represents how much that school fundraises in a given year, in school year 21. And the bars are colored by the grade levels represented by that school. And so what you see on this page is pretty clear, which is that there is a subset of schools that account for the vast majority of total dollars fundraised. And there are about 50% of the schools that account for very little. They make up only about $3 million of the fundraised funds, whereas there's 8 schools that constitute about $26.5 million. And so again, there's nothing inherently wrong with this picture, but as we think about donors into the Catholic system, right, there's only some universe of donors, right? And at some point, that universe will likely get tapped out as if we can't continue to expand it. And so as we think about sort of the health of the system overall, this is, a somewhat stark picture of schools that actually, could be kept operating with probably very little dollars, but are currently, not fundraising very much. And then a lot of schools that are sort of, constituting a lot of the fundraised dollars today. And so really raises some questions about, how we might want to approach fundraising at more of a system level. Whereas right now, I think it's more being approached, there are some schools certainly that are partnering together, but obviously a lot of it is being approached at the individual school level, which is sort of leading to the picture that you see on the page. So as we think about financial aid strategies, we wanted to call up Dr. John Dolan from St. Mary's Junior Senior, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what his school has done.
Thank you. Well, thanks, everyone. St. Mary's joins everyone in applauding the work of the Lynch Foundation and EY Parthenon. Their staff really did a nice job, and I applaud all the effort and work they did to prepare us and work with all of our schools. So we're thrilled to be here and be shoulder to shoulder with some of the best colleagues in education in any city everywhere. So I have 5 points to make in 5 minutes, so this will be quick, and I'm the last one. So I just want to draw your attention to that 704 number. So that's our current enrollment. Now we actually operate Sacred Heart, a pre-K through 5 academy in Lynn. So this is just the Tremont Street analysis today, just the 6 through 12. So that 704 number, in fall of 2018, when the new administration arrived at St. Mary's, that number was 504. 504. 125 seniors getting ready to graduate in the spring of 2019. We just brought in 85 ninth graders. So we're going to have a big senior class leave us. We better figure this out. We better figure it out quick. So the question then is, like all of us, who do we serve? Who is in our backyard? And I want to draw your attention, we're in the Lynn North 1 area. Lynn is a city of about 100,000 people, 15,557 students in Lynn public schools. 67.7% of Lynn public school students are Latino. So when we went about to say, who do we serve, the thing that jumped off the page was, who are we not serving? So our enrollment in spring of 2018, or fall of 2018, was 4% Latino. So what was the issue? Well, the issue was, as you would guess, affordability, perceived affordabilities. A family of AGI of 50,000 people, or $50,000, 4 people living on that AGI, perceive a price point of $17,500 as beyond their reach. And then when we went back and looked at our financial aid strategy, financial aid was seen as an expense. So the thinking became, it's an investment. It's an investment. We were throwing families 6 feet of rope when they needed 10. So as you look to today, by meeting that need, we have moved to a substantially large population of our current enrollment is Latino from Lynn. On just the Sacred Heart campus, 105 families out of the 225 are young Latino families from Lynn, made affordable by our new strategy of financial aid as an investment. Can you make money investing in a community like Lynn for your school? The answer is yes. Now, the coverage isn't great. We're working on that. But this is where funders come into play. And the Lynch Foundation was actually at the table when we were making the calculus on the Latino investment. And the Lynch people are very smart, starting with Peter all down through the organization. And anytime they see an opportunity to invest $1 and then they get $2 back, they take it. So for every Latino student they invest in Lynn going to St. Mary's, we put in $1 at St. Mary's and we ask the family to put in $1. So if you're the Lynch Foundation and you're fueling this growth of Latino opportunities in Lynn, that is who we are in our population, in our city, and we're proud of it. It's an investment that has, as you can see in the analysis, has funded the growth of net tuition revenues for our schools, both campuses. So heading towards a stable, longer-term sustainable model. We're not yet where we want to be, but we wouldn't be near along the path as far as we are without a change of mindset that financial aid is not a budget view as an expense. It's a budget viewed as an investment to retrieve net tuition revenue dollars to operate our school. So that's it. So again, thanks for having me, and I appreciate and applaud all the work done today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Dolan. You came in under time. Very impressive. All right, great. So we have actually made it through all of our data at this point, although, you know, we kind of we brought you the highlights of the data. There is, when you all receive this deck, there's a little bit more data in the back, and obviously all of the schools will be receiving their own individual data compared to their peers and their survey data and everything like that. But we wanted to spend the last few minutes of the presentation on recommendations. And, you know, obviously we have not engaged extensively with every individual school. We know you all have different circumstances, and you know, we are approaching this from more of our observations at the system level. But that said, you know, we have spent for some odd months engaging with the system and understanding, you know, some of the issues that your schools grapple with, and certainly looking at all the data. And so as consultants, we felt like it was still incumbent upon us to offer a few observations and recommendations for both the schools and the system. So we have 3 of them. They're summarized on this page. So and they kind of range from the school level to the system level. And I'll go through each of them individually. But to summarize quickly, the first thing that we're going to talk about is really taking a data-driven approach to reassessing each school's value proposition. And we'll talk a little bit about what that can look like and what that can mean for each individual school. And candidly, you've seen a lot of that come out today in the schools that were highlighted, schools that were taking a look at that data and saying, what is our value proposition and what can we offer to the market? The second thing we'll talk a little bit about is standardizing data collection and reporting. As those of you who had to give us your data individually can probably concur, it is a sort of unwieldy process at best at this point. And so we'd love to offer some of our observations about how to make that better in the future. And then finally, thinking about centralizing or regionalizing some support. So many of the other systems that we've worked with, do have somewhat centralized or regionalized support mechanisms to help schools with things like enrollment or talent or marketing or that type of thing. And we believe there's potentially an opportunity for that here as well. So we'll talk through each of these individually. So as we think about using data-driven insights to refine each school's value proposition, really what this means is first and foremost, understanding your market of prospective families and competing schools. As we went over earlier in the presentation, not every single school is able to fill all of their seats by simply taking from Catholic feeders. And so that means that it's important to really understand what is going on around you, what other options do parents have, and what are they considering. The second piece is being honest about your successes and challenges at the schools. What are you really good at? What are you the best at? And then, what do you need to improve upon and what is the plan to get there? And really all of that can be driven by taking a sort of data-driven approach and really understanding what the data says and hopefully being able to look at it on a fairly regular basis. And then finally, and you heard Dr. Dolan speak to this, but using data to refine the tuition and scholarship model. There is a wide variety of tuition and scholarship models that will be appropriate in this context. There are some schools that are likely going to say that they believe most families can pay full freight, and that's what they want to go after. There are going to be other schools, as we talked about earlier, that are going to have a very low sort of NTR coverage ratio, and both of those models are completely fine as long as they are sort of suited to the market and able to support, your school in operating into the future. But I think our point here is really to sort of assess what is going on with the data and sort of use that to really buttress what this model looks like. And so, as we think about how you can do that, each individual school, as we mentioned, is going to be receiving your own individual data that will be standardized to understand how you compare to your peer schools, both district and charter, as well as the other Catholic schools. And you'll also be receiving survey data in that effect. And so we hope that that data will be the starting point of this conversation in many of your schools. And again, some schools are already having this conversation. You're already using data in this way. But I also know there's a lot of schools where it's been a challenge to get some of this data. And so we do hope that the data that will be provided as part of this project will, hopefully help accelerate this process for some of the schools. Second, speaking of the data, even the data that we have provided back to you is not perfect. And that's because, unfortunately, we're only able to play back sort of what we receive. And I think as all of you are familiar, the existing data infrastructure, at least at a central level, is not where it needs to be at this point. Now, obviously, there are a lot of individual, particularly the private schools, that have a fairly robust data infrastructure, but that's oftentimes because those schools are large enough to be able to support, having a person who is responsible for data or that sort of thing. For a lot of the parish schools and even some of the non-parish schools, that's just not a realistic possibility, and it's not ever going to be. But that doesn't mean that they can't use data effectively. And so this idea of a sort of centralized data system, obviously we need to figure out where that sits and likely potentially build capacity within either the Catholic Schools Office or elsewhere to have the data process happen. But I think there's a couple of steps, even outside of where that sits, that we need to consider, which is first really defining what the data elements are and need to be and what metrics need to be collected within key categories. I think right now there's some schools that give out a lot of information and other schools that don't, and that just comes from a place where there's not really a standard sort of definition of what needs to be put into the system. But even related to that, there's not necessarily sort of standardized definitions for particular data elements. So first, we're not necessarily all singing from the same songbook in terms of what data elements we hand over, but second, we don't sort of define different metrics in the same way. So a good example is, if we think about high school graduation rate, in order to sort of fully calculate that, you would actually want to have a full picture of all students who kind of came through the cohort, even if they may have left to go to another school at a particular time or have dropped out. But there's not really a standardized system right now around, do schools have to preserve those records, that kind of thing. Essentially, there's not really like a rule book or a playbook. And so I think what this recommendation is speaking to is, ideally, we would love to see some sort of way for school leaders to come together with, a centralized data office or regionalized data office to say, this is what the playbook should look like, and we will contribute the data to support that. But we're all going to kind of get on the same page around what data would be useful and how we're going to collect it so that it can be viewed in a way that is comparable, because otherwise it can be very hard to sort of compare apples to apples. And alongside that, understanding how frequently schools should have to give out this data. It's obviously, hopefully it was helpful to go through all of this data that we did tonight, but it's much more helpful to be able to do that on a real-time basis than it is to, as fun as it is to all gather here together on a special night like this. Ideally you want to move to more of a place where looking at this data can be a more regular habit. And then finally, this idea of centralizing or regionalizing infrastructure or support. So I'll admit this was not sort of a big part of the scope of our work, and so we did not comprehensively investigate what this could look like. So this is really more based on our observations, having worked in other systems. And what we'll say is that sometimes those other systems will sort of offer, again, marketing support or support in finding talent or that type of thing to a sort of network of schools. And again, some of your schools are sort of big enough to be able to have some of that support in-house, but not all schools are, and again, are probably never going to be. And so thinking about how you can, in a cost-effective way, offer some of that support to groups of schools. And so I think the questions that we would want to think more about are, what areas of support represent some of those most common needs? And where is it sort of realistic to build that kind of support? And then should that support sit regionally or more centrally? And I think there's a good argument to be made that there's sort of enough differences between the regions that it might make more sense, if you're thinking about attracting talent or that kind of thing, to think about that more at a region level. But ultimately, I think there is an opportunity here to sort of build in some more of that support so that all schools can access it in the ways that some schools that are a little bit larger are able to do so today. So those are our high-level recommendations, and certainly we have time after this for questions. We've spoken to the Lynch Foundation in depth around these recommendations and sort of what they might imply for funders and for school leaders and that type of thing. But we hope that even though they are sort of high level, that you find them helpful, and we're happy to speak more in depth to them. But I think now we're going to open it up for that Q&A period, unless Phil, you want to add anything?